The deed hit the counter so hard, the inkwell jumped. "That seal," Ruth Calloway said, "belonged to a dead man." The clerk froze. Behind her, 30 people in the Harlan Creek land office went silent. Every head turned. Horace Dunbar retired November 1880. Her finger pressed the document flat. This transfer is dated March 1882. 16 months after he left office. 16 months after the seal was supposed to be locked in a county vault. She looked up. "So I'll ask one time. Who put a dead man's stamp on Eli Hargrove's land?" Nobody answered. Nobody moved. In the back of the room, Warren Cole set down his coffee and smiled. Wherever you're listening from tonight, a kitchen in Ohio, a porch in Texas, a living room in Montana, drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do it now and follow this story all the way to the end. Every part is coming. You don't want to miss what happens next. The land office in Harlan Creek had one clock on the wall, and it ran 4 minutes fast. Ruth Calloway knew this because she'd been standing at the counter long enough to watch it tick through 11 of those fast minutes. And in that time, the clerk named Peebles had disappeared through a back door. A second man had followed him, and the document she'd laid flat on the counter, the one with the dead man's seal, had not moved an inch. She hadn't touched it. She didn't need to touch it. She'd already copied every relevant number into her notebook. The filing date, the reference code, the transfer parcel designation, the name pressed into the seal that didn't match the name of any clerk of record alive in March of 1882. The back door opened. Peebles came out alone. He walked to the counter with the careful movements of a man who'd just been told what to say and was concentrating on remembering the exact words. He put both hands on the surface. He looked at a point roughly 6 inches above Ruth's head. "I'm sorry, ma'am. The county register for that period isn't available for public review." "It was available this morning," Ruth said. "I checked before I came." "Circumstances change." "Mr. Peebles." She kept her voice level, the same way she'd kept it level for 7 years in a railroad contracts office, where raising your voice meant losing the room. "The seal on this document belongs to Horace Dunbar. County Clerk Dunbar retired in November of 1880. The transfer date on this document is March 4th, 1882. That is 16 months after Dunbar left office and surrendered his seal to the county vault." She turned the document slightly so the seal caught the window light. "I need the register to confirm what I already know. Or I need you to tell me why a retired clerk's stamp appears on a document he couldn't legally have signed." Peebles' jaw worked. "The register," Ruth said. "Today." From the back of the room came the sound of boot heels on plank floor. Unhurried, deliberate. The walk of a man who'd never needed to hurry because things arranged themselves before he arrived. Warren Cole was perhaps 55, silver at the temples, shoulders broad under a coat that had cost more than most men in Harlan Creek earned in a month. He had the kind of face that was permanently arranged into something that looked like reasonableness. Open, attentive, slightly concerned on your behalf. Ruth had seen that face before on railroad executives who expressed deep regret about bridge inspections that had never happened. "Mrs. Calloway." He stopped at the counter, not behind it, beside her, as if they were on the same side of something. "I heard you'd come to town. Settling in all right at Mrs. Finn's?" "Fine, thank you." "Good, good." He nodded at the document on the counter without looking at it. "Land law out here can be confusing, especially for someone coming from Kansas City, was it? The filing systems are different. The terminology, easy to misread something. I spent 7 years as a contracts clerk for the Northern Pacific Railroad, Ruth said. I've reviewed more land transfer documents than anyone in this county. Something moved behind Cole's eyes. Very small, very fast. The adjustment a chess player makes when the board shifts in a direction he didn't expect. Then you'll appreciate, he said, that administrative records require time to process and that— The register, Ruth said. Mr. Peebles, I'll wait. Cole looked at her for a long moment. She held his gaze and kept her hands still at her sides and didn't give him anything to read. He smiled, set his hat back on his head, walked back to the window without another word. Peebles produced the register 17 minutes later. His hand shook when he opened it to March 1882. The clerk of record listed for that period was James Whitfield. His seal number was 44CR. The seal on the transfer document Cole had filed against the Hargrove parcel carried the number 31CR, Horace Dunbar's number, the man who'd been retired for 16 months. Ruth copied every digit into her notebook and walked out. The cold hit her face on the boardwalk, and she stood in it for a moment and let it do its work. Around her the town moved, a wagon at the far end of the street, 2 women coming out of the dry goods, a dog sleeping in the thin November sun beside the post office steps. An ordinary morning in an ordinary town where a man had been quietly stealing land for years using a dead clerk's stamp and the confidence that no one who mattered would ever look closely enough to notice. She'd come here because her sister had offered a room, and she'd had nowhere else to go. That was the plain truth of it. The house on Birchwood Street in Kansas City had required 2 salaries, and after Daniel's death, and after the letter she'd written to the railroad board about the bridge inspection clause that should have saved his life, and after the termination notice that had appeared under her office door the following Tuesday morning, after all of that, there had been exactly 1 person willing to set an extra plate at the table without requiring anything in return. She hadn't planned to walk into the land office her first morning in town. She'd just done it the way she always did things. She liked to know the shape of a place before she let herself settle into it. Know the paperwork. Know who signed what. Know what the official record said and whether it matched what people told you. 3 hours after she'd arrived, she'd seen the Hargrove transfer document in the public file and felt something go cold and still in the center of her chest. The same cold stillness she'd felt reading the Whitmore Bridge contract at 3 in the morning, 6 weeks before the bridge fell. She'd been right that time. No one had listened. She tucked the notebook inside her coat and walked to the dry goods store. Agnes Pike was behind the counter, weighing flour into a paper sack. She was 60, maybe 62, with a face like country road, worn, useful, covering more ground than it looked like it should. She looked up when Ruth came in and said nothing, which Ruth had already learned meant Agnes was waiting to hear which version of what had happened. The seal on the Hargrove transfer is Horace Dunbar's, Ruth said. Dunbar retired 16 months before the document was filed. Agnes set down the flour scoop. You're certain? I have the register numbers in my notebook. Agnes was quiet for a moment. Then, he's going to know you pulled that register before you reach the end of this street. He already knows. He was in the room. Agnes looked at her with an expression that held several things at once. Something that might have been respect, something that was definitely worry. And underneath both of those, the careful stillness of a woman who'd been waiting a long time for someone to walk through her door with a notebook full of the right numbers. You need to go out to the Hargrove place, Agnes said. I know. Today, not tomorrow, today. Agnes untied her apron. Borrow my mare. She knows the road. The sound came before she saw him. A steady crack from behind the barn, axe on wood, each stroke landing clean, the split pieces falling without wasted motion. Ruth tied the mare at the fence and followed the Hargrove was in his shirt sleeves, despite the cold. The axe coming down with the unhurried rhythm of a man who'd done this 10,000 times and didn't need to see the target to find it. He was taller than she'd expected, lean in the way of men who work hard and eat whatever's left over, with a dark patch over his right eye, and the left eye aimed at a middle distance that had nothing to do with anything in front of him. He heard her boots in the frozen ground at 30 feet. "Who's there?" Not a question. "Ruth Calloway. Agnes Pike sent me." The axe came down one last time and stayed in the stump. "Agnes sends a lot of people. Most of them are buying something." "I'm not buying anything." "Selling?" "No." "Then what do you want on my land, Mrs. Calloway?" Ruth pulled out the notebook. "I want to tell you that the deed transfer Cole filed against your parcel in March of 1882 carries a forged seal, and that I can prove it, and that you have 3 weeks before a county land hearing gives him everything." The wind moved through the dry pasture grass. Somewhere behind her, the cattle shifted weight on frozen ground. Eli's hand came off the axe handles slowly. "Say that again." "The seal belongs to Horace Dunbar. Dunbar retired November 1880. The transfer is dated March 1882. The seal is fraudulent. Whatever Cole claims you owe him, whatever terms he says you agreed to, it's all built on a document that falls apart the moment someone puts it in front of a federal land officer." Eli said nothing. His one good eye was fixed on the space beside her left ear, not looking at her face, listening past it, reading whatever the air around her voice was telling him. "You can prove it," he said finally. "I have the register numbers. I have the filing dates. I have Dunbar's retirement record." She held up the notebook. "I worked contracts for the Northern Pacific for 7 years. I know what a forged seal looks like, and I know how to document why it's forged, in language a territorial judge can't dismiss." "Cole has the county judge." "This goes above the county judge. Forged government seals are a federal matter in this territory." Eli's jaw tightened, loosened. Something worked behind his eyes that had nothing to do with what he could or couldn't see. "Come inside," he said. "Coffee's bad, but it's hot." He moved through the cabin without hesitation, around the table, to the stove, to the shelf above it, hands finding what they needed before she could have pointed him toward anything. 2 cups on the table, exactly 12 inches from the edge. She noticed the precision of it, the way every object in the room occupied a position that had been chosen and memorized and would not be disturbed. He sat across from her, folded his hands flat on the table, turned his face toward her voice. "Tell me what you found," he said. "All of it." She told him. The seal discrepancy, the register entry, the retirement date, the reference codes that didn't match. She read from the notebook without editorializing, the same way she'd read documents for 7 years. Facts in sequence, nothing added, nothing softened. He listened without interrupting. She watched his hands on the table, the fingers pressed down, released, pressed again. When she finished, he said, "I knew something was wrong in the spring. Cole's man came with papers, said I'd signed a deed modification in 1880 that put a repurchase option in Cole's favor." "Had you signed anything in 1880? "A livestock bill of sale, nothing else." His voice was flat, factual. "I told him I'd need the documents reviewed. He said take all the time I needed." A pause. "That's when I knew. A man who's on solid ground tells you to take your time. A man who's already fixed the record tells you to take your time. You tried to verify." "I had a man in town go to the register. Peebles said it was being rebound. He told me the same thing today, right up until I mentioned the territorial commissioner." Something shifted at the corner of Eli's mouth. "You know the commissioner?" "I know what office he works in, and I know how to write a letter." This time it was a real thing, brief, restrained, but unmistakably there. "There's a problem," Eli said. "Tell me." "The original land grant. My father filed it in 1871. I had a copy." His voice stayed even, but she heard the weight underneath it. Not grief exactly, something older and more compressed. 3 months ago, someone came into this cabin while I was working the north pasture. Didn't take anything visible. Didn't move anything I could feel. He paused. But the land grant copy was gone. The word sat in the cold air between them. "You're certain it was there before?" 6 months before that, I'd checked every document in that box. After my accident, I was learning where everything was again. The grant was in the back section, behind the water rights papers. His hands pressed flat on the table. When I went to find it after Cole's man came, it wasn't there. "And you told no one?" Who was I going to tell? No bitterness in it, just accuracy. "The sheriff has dinner at Cole's house every second Friday. The lawyer in town was retained by Cole last year. Peebles is Peebles." He shook his head. I had no proof of who took it. Only the knowledge that the one document that proved my independent claim was gone, and the man who needed it gone was already standing at my door. Ruth opened the notebook to a clean page. "The Territorial Land Office in Helena keeps duplicate records of every original grant filing from 1865 onward," she said. "Federal requirement under the homestead provisions. Cole can take a copy from your home. He cannot remove a federal duplicate from Helena without creating a record of the removal that's worse for him than the original document." She looked up. "The duplicate exists. We need to get it here before the 14th. Eli went still, the kind of still that meant the gears were turning fast behind it. 3 weeks, he said. Enough time if we move now. He'll know what we're doing. He already knows I pulled the register. He knows I came here, yes. Ruth set down the pen. He knows. That doesn't change what the documents say. Eli was quiet for a long moment. The stove ticked. Outside, the wind came in a long, steady push against the walls, patient and cold. "Before I lost my sight," he said, "I worked 11 years for a private investigations firm out of Denver. Fraud cases mostly. Land schemes, banking manipulation, forged contracts." His hand found his coffee cup, lifted it, set it back in exactly the same spot. "I know how Cole built this. I know which records he touched, and in what order, because it's the same method I've seen used 3 times in 20 years. He's good at it." A pause. "But he made one mistake." "He used a dead man's seal," Ruth said. "He got sloppy," Eli said. "Or he got confident. Either way." His one good eye fixed on the space near her voice. "I know where every piece of this puzzle is hidden. I know which county offices, which back files, which secondary records he would have had to alter to make the primary forgery hold. I've known for months." Something tightened in his jaw. "I just couldn't read them anymore." Ruth looked at him. He was looking back at her, or rather, listening back at her, reading whatever information the quality of her silence was carrying. "And I can't go where you need to go," she said. "I don't know this territory. I don't know which rocks to look under." "No," he said. So. He set his hands flat on the table. "You can read what I find." "I can do considerably more than that," Ruth said. "I can document it, sequence it, and present it in language that will survive a challenge from every lawyer Cole can afford to hire." Outside, The first stars were beginning to show over the eastern ridge. The cattle in the far pasture had gone quiet. The day was almost gone, and they had 3 weeks, and a dead man's seal, and a filing in Helena that Cole hadn't been able to reach. And across the table from her, a man who'd been sitting alone in this ordered, precise cabin, knowing exactly what had been done to him, and having no way to prove it. "There's one more thing," Eli said. His voice had changed, not softer, but more careful, like he was setting something fragile down. "Why are you doing this? Agnes didn't send you just because you can read contracts." Ruth was quiet for a moment.
2 years ago," she said, "I read a bridge inspection clause in a railroad contract at 3 in the morning, and I knew with absolute certainty what was going to happen if no one acted on it. I wrote the letter. I documented everything the same way I'm documenting this." She looked at the notebook on the table between them. 11 men died. My husband was one of them. And the railroad thanked me for my 7 years of service and put a termination notice under my door. The stove clicked. The wind pressed against the walls. "I was right," she said. "I had the proof. I had the documentation. And it wasn't enough, because I gave it to people who had more to lose from the truth than from the disaster." She closed the notebook. "I'm not making that mistake again. This time, I take it to the authority that can't be bought at a county level. And I take it with every piece of evidence documented and sequenced and airtight before I walk through the door." Eli said nothing for a long moment. Then, "Be here at first light. There's a secondary deed registry at the Millbrook County seat that Cole won't have touched. It's a duplicate filing system that was mandated in 1879, and half the county officials don't even know it exists. If my father's original 1871 grant was re-registered under that system, there's a copy Cole has never seen." He stood, his hand finding the edge of the table without looking for it. "I'll know which drawer. You'll read what's in it." Ruth stood, pulled on her coat, picked up the notebook. She was almost to the door when he spoke again. "Mrs. Calloway?" She stopped. "That seal discrepancy." His voice was quiet. "How long after you arrived before you found it?" 3 hours, she said. "The land office was the first place I went." She heard him exhale, short, sharp, the almost shape of a laugh. 3 hours. "I like to know what kind of town I'm in," Ruth said, "before I decide whether to stay in it." She opened the door. The cold came in hard and clean. "First light," Eli said. "First light," she said. She rode back toward Harlan Creek with the notebook inside her coat and the stars coming out hard and bright overhead. And she didn't let herself think about Daniel, or the bridge, or the letter, or the Tuesday afternoon termination notice. She thought about a secondary deed registry in Millbrook that Cole didn't know existed, and a man in a cabin who knew exactly where the proof was buried and had been waiting in the dark for someone who could read it. Agnes Pike had tea ready when she walked in. She sat down across the table without taking her coat off and opened the notebook to a fresh page. "Tell me everything you know about Warren Cole," she said. "How he started, who helped him, which officials he owns and how long he's owned them." Agnes poured the tea, sat down, folded her hands. "It started," Agnes said, "with the Alderman family. 1879. They were the first." Ruth pressed her pen to the page. "Tell me." Agnes Pike talked for 2 hours. She talked the way a woman talks when she's been holding something too long, and finally found someone with the right hands to take it. Carefully at first, testing the weight, then faster once she was sure it wouldn't be dropped. She talked about the Alderman family first, the way she'd said she would, and by the time the tea had gone cold,
Ruth had filled 11 pages in her notebook, and the sick feeling that had been sitting behind her sternum since that morning in the land office had hardened into something colder and more useful than sickness. The Alderman family had settled their parcel in 1874. Good land, creek-fed, running along the eastern ridge. Joseph Alderman had taken a small loan from Cole's Bank in 1878. $80, short-term, standard terms. He'd repaid it in 5 months, all of it. Ruth wrote that down. Then in 1879, Cole had presented a document claiming Alderman had signed a deed modification that year, shifting a portion of the repurchase rights. Alderman had said he'd never signed any such thing. Cole had produced the document. The county judge had reviewed it. The judge had found in Cole's favor. "Where are the Aldermans now?" Ruth asked. "Nebraska," Agnes said. "Left in the spring of 1880. Took what they could carry." "And the land?" "Cole sold it to a cattle operation out of Billings 18 months later. Made 4 times what he paid the bank." Agnes wrapped both hands around her cold cup. Then there was the Prentice family, 1881. Same pattern. Small loan, repaid, then a deed modification nobody remembered signing. Then the Holt brothers in 1882. Then a widow named Frances Cartwright in 1883, who had no family in the territory and no money for a lawyer, and was off her land before the snow came. Ruth looked at her notebook. 4 families, 4 parcels, all on the eastern ridge. "Why the eastern ridge?" she asked. Agnes was quiet for a moment. "Nobody knows for certain. Cole doesn't explain himself. But there's been talk, just talk, mind you, that the Northern Pacific surveying crews came through this county last spring, looking at route options." Ruth set down her pen. She sat very still for a moment in Agnes Pike's warm kitchen, with the cold pushing against the windows and the tea gone cold between them, and 11 pages of notes in front of her. And she thought about a railroad contracts office in Kansas City, where she'd spent 7 years reading documents that other people signed without reading. And she thought about how the Northern Pacific paid for land it needed, and what it paid, and how far in advance it needed to know it was going to need it. "He knows the route," Ruth said. "He already knows where the rail line is going." Agnes said nothing. Her expression said she'd arrived at this conclusion considerably earlier and had been waiting for someone else to say it out loud. "The Eastern Ridge parcels," Ruth said. "All of them. He's been acquiring them for 3 years because he knows the railroad is coming through, and he knows exactly which land they'll need to buy." She picked up the pen. "Which means the Hargrove parcel isn't just land to him. It's a transaction he's already made in his head. He's already sold it to the railroad. In his mind, it's already done." "That's my read," Agnes said quietly. "And a man who's already made the sale in his mind is a dangerous kind of man to be standing between." Ruth closed the notebook. "Does Eli know about the railroad?" "I don't know what Eli knows. He doesn't come to town much. When he does, people—" Agnes stopped, started again more carefully. "People aren't always kind. About the eye. About the state of the ranch. Small towns have a way of deciding a man is finished before he's finished." Ruth thought about the cabin. The axe coming down clean and true. The coffee cups placed exactly 12 inches from the table edge. The way he'd said, "I know where every piece of this puzzle is hidden." Not with bitterness, but with the flat precision of a man who'd spent months in the dark, mapping the shape of what had been done to him. He wasn't finished. Not even close. She was at his fence before first light. The cabin had smoke coming from the chimney already. She tied Agnes's mare at the post, and her boots had barely touched the porch step when the door opened. "You're early," Eli said. "So are you." "I don't sleep much." He stepped back from the doorway. "Coffee's on." She came inside. He was already dressed, vest, boots, the dark coat he'd probably worn for years, judging by the way it sat on his shoulders. His hands knowing the distance from every surface to every other surface, the way a musician knows the distance between keys. She sat at the table. He set her coffee down, left side, 2 inches from the edge, the same placement as yesterday, she realized. He'd already decided where her cup went. She wasn't sure what to do with that information, so she just picked up the cup and drank. "Agnes told me about the railroad," Ruth said. Eli's hands stilled for a moment on the stove handle. Just a moment. "When did you figure it out?" "Last night. Agnes mentioned the surveying crews." He came to the table and sat down, folded his hands. "I figured it out in August. A man named Holloway came through, said he was a livestock buyer, asked too many questions about the creek access and the ridge elevation and not enough about the cattle." A pause. "Railroad men have a particular way of looking at land, like they're already drawing lines across it." "You didn't tell anyone." "Telling people would have told Cole I knew. And if Cole knew I knew about the railroad money." He stopped. "A blind man on an isolated ranch who suddenly becomes inconvenient." Ruth looked at him. He was looking back at her in that way he had, face turned toward her voice, his one good eye fixed on the space just past her, reading the texture of the air between them. "He'd move faster," she said. "He'd move differently," Eli said. "So far, everything Cole has done has been through paperwork and process, lawyers and judges and land offices." His jaw set. "I'd prefer to keep it that way." "Then we need to move before he decides the paperwork is taking too long." Ruth opened her notebook. "Agnes gave me 4 prior cases: the Aldermans, the Prentice family, the Holt brothers, Francis Cartwright. All Eastern Ridge. All the same pattern. Small loan, repayment, then a deed modification document appearing out of nowhere." "Same forger," Eli said. "Almost certainly. The same seal was used?" "I don't know. I couldn't verify." His voice held a careful flatness that she recognized now, not as lack of feeling, but as the particular control of a man who's made a habit of keeping feeling from interfering with thinking. "But the methodology is identical, and a man who commits fraud once by accident commits it the same way every time because the first time worked. Then there may be 5 forged documents, not 1. And if the seal discrepancy exists in all 5, the pattern becomes a criminal case, not a civil dispute." Ruth looked at her notes. "The Aldermans went to Nebraska. Do you know if they kept any documents from the proceedings?" "Joseph Alderman left this county with 2 horses and a wagon," Eli said. "I don't know what he kept. But his brother Caleb is in Millbrook. Works at the grain exchange." He tilted his head slightly. "Caleb was at the original proceedings. He saw the deed modification document Cole produced." "I'd bet my right eye—" He stopped. "I'd bet considerably that Caleb Alderman has been waiting 3 years for someone to ask him about it." Ruth wrote the name down. Millbrook. Caleb Alderman. Grain exchange. "We go to Millbrook today," she said. "We go to Millbrook today," Eli agreed. "Secondary deed registry first. It's in the basement of the county records building. Most clerks up here don't know it exists, because the mandate came down from the territorial government, and half the county officials ignored the implementation memo. But my father was meticulous." Something in his voice softened slightly on the word, then closed again. "He filed everything twice. If the 1871 grant is in that secondary system, there's a copy Cole has never touched." They rode out an hour later, Ruth on Agnes's bay mare, Eli on his gray gelding, who moved with the steady, unhurried confidence of an animal that had been doing this particular job for many years. The road to Millbrook ran east along the creek, the water low and quiet between its banks, the cottonwoods stripped bare by the November cold. Ruth described what she saw as they rode, not because he'd asked her to, but because it felt wrong to have eyes and not use them when the person beside her was navigating by sound and memory and the feel of his horse's gait under him. The frost on the creek stones, the hawk hanging motionless against the gray sky to the north. "Redtail," Eli said, before she could identify it. "How do you know?" "He's been hunting that stretch of creek since I was 12. He works from north to south, always the same pattern, then circles back at midday." A pause. "Some things you just know, not because you can see them, because you've paid enough attention for long enough." They rode in silence for a while. "Can I ask you something?" Ruth said. "You can ask." "Why did you leave the investigations work, before the accident?" He was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer. The horse's hooves made a steady sound on the frost-hardened road. "I was good at finding things," he said finally. "I was very good at it. And I was good at finding them in ways that held up in court and put people away and ended the schemes that were ruining smaller people who didn't have the resources to protect themselves." Another pause. "And then I worked a case in Denver, a silver mine fraud, 3 investors ruined, 2 families losing everything. And I found the proof, all of it, tight as a drum." His voice stayed even, controlled. "And the man behind it had dinner with the judge 3 times a week and had for 15 years. And the case was dismissed on a procedural technicality. And the man I built the case against shook my hand outside the courthouse and told me I'd done fine work and that I ought to think about whether investigations was really the right career for a man of my particular temperament." Ruth said nothing. "I came back here," Eli said. "My father had been gone 2 years by then. The ranch needed work. I thought—" He stopped, started again. "I thought doing work with my hands for a while would be a reasonable thing. And then the accident happened. And then Cole started coming around." He shook his head once. "Turns out you don't get to retire from certain kinds of trouble. It just waits for you to stop moving." They reached Millbrook before 10. The county records building was a 2-story stone structure that smelled of old paper and the particular mustiness of documents that hadn't been disturbed in years. A young clerk looked up when they came in, and his eyes went to Eli's eye patch, and then to Ruth, and then back to his ledger, with the fixed concentration of someone pretending they hadn't looked. "Secondary deed registry," Eli said. "Territorial mandate, 1879. Basement filing system." The clerk blinked. "I'm not sure we have. 3rd door on the left past the main staircase," Eli said. "Key is on a hook behind the cabinet beside the door. Has been since the building was constructed because nobody ever goes down there, and nobody ever thought to move it." The clerk stared at him. "I used to work investigations," Eli said pleasantly. "I've been in every county records basement in this territory." The basement was cold and low-ceilinged, and the light came from 2 windows barely above ground level that let in gray November sky and not much else. Ruth took the lamp from the hook inside the door and lit it, while Eli stood at the filing cabinet on the east wall, his fingers moving across the drawer labels with a quick, sure motion of someone reading by touch. "Here," he said. He opened the 3rd drawer from the bottom. "Filed by original grant year. 1871 would be—" His fingers moved through the folders. Stopped. "Here." Ruth brought the lamp close. The folder was thin, 2 pages. The paper yellowed at the edges. The ink faded to brown, but fully legible. At the top of the first page, in a careful hand, "Hargrove Land Grant, Eastern Creek Ridge, filed April 14th, 1871. James Coltrane Hargrove, grantee." Below that, the description of the parcel. Below that, the county clerk's seal, A different number than the one on Cole's fraudulent transfer. A different name, a different date. All of it precisely and unimpeachably recorded in a basement that Warren Cole had apparently never known existed. "It's here," Ruth said. Eli didn't move. "Read me the filing number." She read it. He was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper and held it out to her. "That's the number Cole's document claims supersedes. The modification document." Ruth unfolded it, read the number Cole's filing claimed to override, looked at the basement document, looked back. "Cole's modification document claims to supersede a filing number that doesn't match your father's original grant," she said. "The numbers don't correspond. At all. He either forged against the wrong document, or he never knew this registry existed and was working from an incomplete record." "He never knew," Eli said. There was something in his voice she hadn't heard before. Not satisfaction exactly, but the specific quality of a long calculation finally resolving. "I checked. Cole bought the Harlan Creek Bank in 1877. The secondary registry mandate was issued in 1879. He'd already established his relationships with the county clerks by the time the basement files were being created. Nobody told him about them because nobody thought the files mattered." "They matter now," Ruth said. "Make copies of everything," Eli said. "Every number, every date, every seal identifier. 2 copies. Keep one on your person and one in the saddlebag." She wrote quickly and carefully while he stood by the cabinet with his hand resting on the open drawer, and the lamp threw their shadows long against the stone walls. And outside the small windows, the November sky was the color of old pewter and completely still. Caleb Alderman was a broad, quiet man of about 50 who'd developed the particular economy of movement that comes from years of physical work and the permanent wariness of someone who'd been on the losing end of something and wasn't over it. He recognized Eli's name immediately, and when Ruth laid out what she'd found in the land office, the forged seal, the registry discrepancy, the secondary basement files, something happened in his face that was painful to watch. The long unwinding of something that had been wound very tight for a very long time. "I knew it," Caleb said. His voice came out rough. "I told Joseph. I told him that document was wrong. The date on it was wrong. The wording was wrong. It didn't sound like anything Joseph would have signed, because Joseph read everything twice before he put his name on it." He pressed his hands flat on the grain exchange counter. "The judge wouldn't hear it. Said we were confused. Said land law was complicated, and perhaps we'd misremembered." "Did you keep anything from the proceedings?" Ruth asked. "Any documents? Any notes?" Caleb looked at her for a moment. Then he reached under the counter and pulled out a flat tin box and set it between them. "I've been keeping this for 3 years," he said, waiting. Inside the box, a handwritten account of the proceedings in Joseph Alderman's own hand, dated the day of the hearing. A copy of the deed modification Cole had produced, which Joseph had managed to transcribe from memory the same night. And at the bottom, a note in different handwriting, angular, precise, that Ruth didn't recognize. "What's this?" she asked, holding it up toward Eli. He reached out. His fingers found the edge of the paper, and he held it, not reading it, couldn't read it, but holding it. "Read it to me," he said quietly. Ruth read it. It was a single paragraph, unsigned, undated, stating that the seal on the Alderman deed modification document had been observed to match the seal of retired county clerk Horace Dunbar, and that this observation was being recorded in the event it became relevant to a future challenge. The basement filing. The seal discrepancy. Joseph Alderman's transcription. And now this. "Who wrote this?" Ruth asked Caleb. Caleb looked at the paper. "Came under my door the morning after the hearing," he said. "I never found out who." Ruth looked at Eli. He was looking at the space just past her shoulder with the particular stillness she'd learned meant he was putting something together that he hadn't expected to find. "Eli," she said carefully, "did you know about the Alderman case?" "I knew about it," he said. "I was here when it happened." A pause. "I tried to look into it at the time, informally, before the accident. I found the same seal discrepancy, and I wrote down what I found." He was quiet for a moment. "And then I left it in an envelope and put it under Caleb Alderman's door, because I didn't have enough to build a formal case, and I didn't want to raise his hopes, and I thought—" His jaw tightened. "I thought I'd have more time." Caleb was staring at him. "That was your note," Ruth said. "That was my handwriting," Eli said. "Before." He set the paper down carefully on the counter, precisely aligned with the edge. "I wrote it 2 months before the accident." The grain exchange was quiet around them. Outside, the Millbrook street carried its ordinary midday sound: wagons, voices, the distant clang of the smithy. In here, it was just the three of them, and a tin box, and 3 years of waiting that had just become something else. "It's enough," Ruth said. She looked at her notebook, at the pages from the night before, at the basement numbers she'd just copied. Between the secondary registry, the seal documentation, the alderman precedent, and the filing discrepancy in Cole's own modification document, it's enough to take to a federal land officer. It's enough to stop the hearing. Caleb looked at her. "You can do that?" "We can do that," Ruth said. She glanced at Eli. "If we move in the next 48 hours, before Cole knows what we've found." Eli picked up his cane from where he'd hooked it on the counter edge. He straightened. His jaw was set, and his one good eye was fixed on the middle distance. And he had the look of a man who'd been waiting in the dark for a long time, and had just heard the specific sound he'd been listening for. "Then we move," he said. "Tonight, I'll tell you which federal officer to write, and exactly what language to use. I've made this argument before. I know what holds and what doesn't." He paused. "You write it. I'll tell you what to say." Ruth looked at him. "Between the two of us," she said, "I think we might actually terrify him." Something shifted in Eli Hargrove's face. Not quite a smile, but the architecture of one, the bones of it showing through for just a moment before he turned toward the door. "That's the idea," he said. They rode back to Harlan Creek in the last of the afternoon light, and Ruth wrote the letter to the federal land officer that night at Agnes Pike's kitchen table, while Eli sat across from her and dictated. He dictated the way he'd clearly done everything in his working life, precisely, without hesitation, with the particular economy of a man who understood that the wrong word in a legal document was as dangerous as no word at all. He knew the officer's name, his jurisdiction, the specific statutory language of the 1879 Territorial Land Fraud Provision, and the exact sequence in which the evidence needed to be presented to make the argument airtight before a challenge could be mounted against it. Ruth wrote and occasionally pushed back, a phrase that was too technical, a sequence that buried the strongest evidence, and he listened to her objections and either incorporated them or explained in precise terms why the original phrasing was necessary. Agnes moved around the kitchen behind them, refilling cups, saying nothing, with the expression of a woman watching something she'd been hoping to see for a long time. By 9 o'clock, the letter was done. Ruth read it back in full. Eli listened with his hands flat on the table and his eyes closed. Not sleeping, she'd learned. That was how he reviewed things, hearing them without the interference of anything else. "Change one thing," he said when she finished. "Third paragraph, where it says, 'appears to constitute.' Change it to 'constitutes.' Appears gives him room to argue degree. We're not arguing degree. We're stating fact." Ruth made the change. "Now read the last paragraph again." She read it. The summary of evidence. The request for federal intervention prior to the county hearing on the 14th. The list of supporting documents available for review. It'll hold, Eli said. It'll hold if it gets there in time. Ruth set down the pen. The federal land office is in Helena. If we send it by post, it'll take 4 days minimum, and we have 11 days until the hearing. That's tight. There's a telegraph office in Millbrook, Eli said. We can send the substantive contents today. Follow with the full documentation by courier. He paused. I know the officer, Thomas Brandt. He was fair when I worked with him in '79. He won't sit on this. You trust him? I trust that he doesn't like Warren Cole, and doesn't like what Cole represents, and has been waiting for a properly documented case to act on for 3 years. Eli's mouth pressed into a thin line. The problem has always been documentation. Nobody's put the full picture together before. Agnes set a fresh cup of coffee at Ruth's elbow without being asked. Ruth looked at the letter, at the 11 pages of notes behind it, at the basement registry numbers copied in 2 places, as Eli had instructed. There's something else, Ruth said. I've been thinking about it since Millbrook. She turned to a page in her notebook. The 4 prior cases, Alderman's, Prentice, Holtz, Cartwright. Cole used the same method each time. Small loan, repayment, then a deed modification document appearing after the fact. She looked up. Eli, where did the loans come from? His bank. But the original loan documents, who drafted them? Who witnessed the signatures? Eli went still, because if the original loan documents were drafted by the same hand that later produced the deed modifications, Ruth said, then the witness signatures on the loan documents are also the witness signatures on the forgeries. And if we can show that the same 2 or 3 people witnessed every single fraudulent document across all 5 cases, it becomes conspiracy, Eli said. His voice was quiet. Not one man acting alone. A network. He leaned forward. Peebles witnessed 2 of the prior hearings. I remember that from when I was looking into the Alderman case. Peebles, Ruth said. Who else? A man named Garrett. He works at Cole's bank. Has for 10 years. Eli's hands pressed flat on the table. And a notary named Stiles, who died in 1882. Convenient timing. Ruth wrote the names down. If Peebles witnessed the original loan documents and the forgeries, and we can document that across multiple cases, then Peebles isn't just a cooperative clerk. He's a material participant in a land fraud conspiracy. She looked at Eli. That changes what he's risked. That changes how hard he'll work to keep this buried. It also changes, Eli said carefully, how hard Cole will work when he realizes we're not just challenging one document. We're unraveling the whole structure. Agnes spoke from across the kitchen. Her voice was quiet and carried no drama. He already knows. Ruth turned. Agnes had her back to the window, her arms crossed over her chest, her face carrying the expression of someone delivering news they've been dreading. Denny Marsh came into the store this afternoon while you were in Millbrook. He's a friend of mine, drives the supply wagon between here and the county seat. He said Cole had 2 men ride out to Millbrook this morning, before you got there. She paused. And that one of them came back early. Alone. Fast. The kitchen was very quiet. He knows we went to the basement registry, Ruth said. He knows you went to Millbrook, Agnes said. Whether he knows what you found, he'll know by morning, Eli said. He stood. The movement was controlled, but there was urgency underneath it now. Contained, but present. He has someone at the grain exchange. Has to. Caleb Alderman has been sitting on that tin box for 3 years in a public building in a town Cole operates in. If Cole is half as careful as his track record suggests, he has eyes on Caleb. He reached for his cane. We needed 48 hours. We may have 12. Then we move tonight, Ruth said. The telegraph office in Millbrook closes at 8. We've missed it. His jaw tightened. First light tomorrow. We ride to Millbrook, send the telegraph to Brant, and we don't stop moving until it's sent. And tonight? Tonight you don't stay at Mrs. Finn's. Ruth looked at him. He was looking back at her, facing her, his one eye aimed just past her shoulder. Cole is careful, Eli said. He's been careful for years. But careful men get reckless when they feel the ground shifting. A widow woman, alone at a boarding house at the edge of town, who's been going through his land records. He stopped. You'll stay here. Agnes has the room. I've had the room ready since Tuesday, Agnes said, entirely without surprise. Ruth looked at Agnes, then back at Eli. Was that your idea or hers? Does it matter? Somewhat. Agnes made a small sound that might have been a laugh. It was mine, she said. Eli just agreed faster than I expected. Ruth picked up her notebook, looked at the letter on the table, thought about the boarding house room at Mrs. Finn's, narrow and cold, the door with a latch that didn't seat properly in the frame. Thought about Cole in the land office that morning, with his smooth voice and his careful smile, and the way he'd looked at her, like something he hadn't yet decided how to categorize. All right, she said. Eli left 20 minutes later. Ruth stood at Agnes's front window and watched him move down the dark street, his cane finding the boardwalk with the steady, confident tap of a man who'd learned every inch of the route by feel. She watched until he turned the corner and disappeared. He'll be fine, Agnes said from behind her. I know, Ruth said. She wasn't sure she did. The trouble came at 6 the next morning, 40 minutes before they'd planned to ride. Ruth heard the horses first, 2 of them, moving fast on the main street, stopping at the front of the building. Then voices. Then boots on the porch steps and a fist on the front door, heavy and unhurried. The knock of someone who doesn't need to hurry because they carry the authority to make you open it anyway. Agnes answered. Ruth stood in the kitchen doorway with her notebook in her hand and listened. The man's name was Deputy Crane. He was looking, he said, for Mrs. Ruth Calloway. He had some questions about her activities in the county records office in Millbrook yesterday afternoon. Ruth came to the door. Crane was perhaps 40, broad, with the particular blankness of a man who'd been doing someone else's thinking for long enough that his own had atrophied. Behind him, his horse and one other. The second horse was riderless. Mrs. Calloway, Crane said, I'll need you to come with me to the sheriff's office. On what matter? Ruth asked. There's a complaint filed. Unauthorized access to restricted county documents. Ruth looked at him. The secondary deed registry is a public record, mandated by territorial law. There's no restriction on access. The key was on a hook in plain view. Ma'am, if you have a legal instrument requiring my attendance, I'll need to see it. She kept her voice level and her hands still. If you don't have one, then this is a request, and I'll need a few minutes to get my coat. Crane's jaw tightened. He reached into his coat, produced a folded paper, held it out. Ruth took it, read it. It was a complaint signed by Warren Cole, alleging that Mrs. Ruth Calloway had removed documents from the Millbrook County Records Office without authorization. It cited a specific filing number. The filing number was the Alderman's secondary registry entry. She'd made copies. She hadn't removed anything. The originals were still in the basement where she'd found them. This filing number refers to a document I examined and copied by hand, Ruth said. I didn't remove anything from the building. You're welcome to go to Millbrook and confirm the originals are in the drawer where I found them. She folded the complaint and held it back out. And you should know that the document referenced in this complaint
is the same document I've already sent a letter about to the federal land officer in Helena. Cole didn't know it. Something moved in Crane's face, very fast. Then it was gone. "I'll still need you to come in," he said, but the authority had leaked out of the words slightly. "Then I'll come in," Ruth said. "Give me 5 minutes." She closed the door, turned. Agnes was already at the back door, her coat on, her expression carrying a focused urgency that had replaced the careful patience of the night before. "I'll go get Eli," she said. "Go," Ruth said. She went to the kitchen table, opened her notebook, tore out the 2 pages of registry numbers, carefully at the binding, and folded one set into her boot and the other inside her camisole, against her skin. Picked up the letter they'd written the night before, the one with Eli's precise legal language and her careful documentation, and put it inside her coat. Then she went back to the front door and opened it and looked at Deputy Crane's blank, patient face. "I'm ready," she said. The sheriff's office smelled of old coffee and wood ash, and the accumulated tedium of a room where nothing urgent happened, unless someone with more authority than the room's occupants required it. Sheriff Dawes was perhaps 60, heavy-set, with the practiced incuriosity of a man who'd learned that asking questions led to having to do something about the answers. He didn't look at Ruth when she came in. He looked at the complaint paper Crane set on his desk. "Mrs. Calloway," he said to the paper, "you understand there's been a complaint filed." "I've read it," Ruth said. "It's inaccurate. I removed nothing from the Millbrook Records building. The documents I examined are public records, accessible under territorial law." "Mr. Cole says," "With respect, Sheriff, what Mr. Cole says about public records is considerably less relevant than what the law says." Ruth sat down in the chair across from the desk, without being invited to. "I'd like to understand the legal basis on which I'm being held. If there isn't one, I'd like to understand why I was asked to come here." Dawes looked up from the paper for the first time. He looked at her with the expression of a man who'd expected something more manageable and was recalibrating. The door opened behind her. She knew it was Eli before he spoke. The particular sound of his cane on the plank floor, the quality of the air that shifted when he came into a room. He'd moved fast. Agnes had moved faster. "Tom," Eli said. Dawes's expression shifted again. Something older and more complicated moving through it. The look of a man who'd known someone a long time and owed them something he hadn't paid. "Eli." Dawes's voice was quieter. "I wasn't told you were involved." "I expect there's quite a bit you weren't told." Eli came to stand beside Ruth's chair. His cane found the leg of it, and he stood there with his hand on the back of it, not sitting, just placing himself beside her. "What's the actual charge, Tom? Because if the charge is accessing a public document in a public building during public hours, then you don't have a charge, and we both know it." Dawes looked at the complaint paper, at Eli, at Ruth, at the paper again. "Cole is a powerful man," Dawes said. Finally, honestly. The first honest thing that had been said in this room. "I know that," Eli said. "He has..." Dawes stopped. "He has relationships in this county that go back a long time." "I know that too." Eli's voice held no judgment, just the same flat accuracy he applied to everything. "I also know that you've had dinner at my father's table, Tom. I know you were at his funeral. And I know that you know the difference between a powerful man and a right one." The silence in the room had weight to it. Dawes looked at his desk, at the complaint. His hand moved to it, paused, moved away. "There's no legal basis for detention," he said finally. "You're free to go, Mrs. Calloway." Ruth stood. "Tom," Eli said. His voice had changed, still quiet,
but carrying something underneath it now. How long has Cole had someone watching Caleb Alderman in Millbrook? Dawes said nothing. 6 months? A year? Eli waited. Because if Caleb is in danger, that's something that falls under your jurisdiction in a way that can't be managed by ignoring it. Dawes picked up the complaint paper, looked at it for a long moment. Then he folded it once and put it in his desk drawer and closed the drawer. I'll send a wire to the Millbrook sheriff, he said, asking him to keep an eye on the grain exchange. He didn't look at either of them. That's all I'm saying. That's enough, Eli said. Thank you, Tom. They walked out into the cold morning air, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Ruth became aware that her hands were shaking. Not from fear, she thought, but from the particular physical aftermath of holding everything still for 40 minutes when everything in her wanted to move. That was well done, Eli said quietly. In there. You got there in time, she said. Agnes runs fast for 60. Something almost warm was in his voice. Then it settled back. Cole is escalating, using Crane, coming at you directly. That's not the behavior of a confident man. That's the behavior of a man who's seen the ground shift and is trying to reset it before it goes further. Which means he knows more than we thought, Ruth said. Or he's guessing and guessing right. Eli's cane tapped the boardwalk. Either way, we can't wait until tomorrow for the telegraph. We ride to Millbrook now, this morning, before he can make another move. Ruth pulled her coat tighter. Inside it, the letter pressed against her ribs. In her boot, the registry numbers. Against her skin, the backup copy. If he comes at the ranch while we're gone, she said. If he sends someone while we're on the road. He won't move against the ranch yet. Too visible. Too many people in this county still remember my father and what this land means. His jaw set. What he'll do is try to discredit the evidence before it reaches Brant, which means we need to be the first thing that reaches Brant. They walked toward the livery. Eli. She said his name without planning to. He turned his face toward her voice. When this is over, when the hearing is done, and Brant has the case and Cole can't touch it anymore. She paused. What happens to the ranch? He was quiet for several steps. I run it, he said. Same as I've been running it. His voice was even, but she heard something underneath it. Not uncertainty. Something more like a question he'd been asking himself for a long time and hadn't finished answering. Same as I've been trying to run it. He stopped walking. His cane was still. I can do it. I've always been able to do it. The land doesn't care what I can see. The cattle don't care. The fence posts don't care. A pause. The problem has always been the paperwork, the legal documents, the things that require eyes. Ruth looked at him, at the set of his jaw, at the careful stillness of a man who'd arranged his entire life around what he could do and had been systematically refusing, for 2 years, to acknowledge what the arrangement cost him. The paperwork is solvable, she said. He turned his face toward her, not searching exactly, listening. I'm not going anywhere, Ruth said. Not until this is finished. And if it turns out I'm useful after it's finished. She stopped herself, looked at the road ahead. That's a conversation for after the 14th. Eli said nothing for a moment. The wind moved between them. First things first, he said. First things first, she agreed. They walked the rest of the way to the livery without speaking, and when they rode out of Harlan Creek 20 minutes later, heading east toward Millbrook, with the letter inside Ruth's coat and the evidence copied twice, and the November sky going flat and gray overhead, neither of them looked back at the town. But Ruth felt it behind her, the weight of Cole's knowledge, the thin ice of the next 11 days, The hearing date, sitting at the end of those days like a door that was going to open one way or the other. She pressed her hand against her coat, felt the letter underneath. 11 days. She touched her heels to Agnes's mare and rode faster. The telegraph office in Millbrook opened at 7, and the operator, a young man named Fell, with ink-stained fingers and the nervous energy of someone who understood that the messages he sent mattered without always knowing why, took the full transcription of the letter without comment and read it back twice to confirm accuracy before sending it. Ruth stood at the counter and listened to every word. Eli stood beside her and listened to the silence between the words. The operator's breathing, the small hesitations, the places where the language became technical enough that Fell's cadence slowed slightly. When it was done, Eli said, "Send the confirmation request. We need to know it was received." Fell sent the confirmation. They waited 20 minutes in the cold office while the machine clicked and was quiet and clicked again. And then Fell tore off the return strip and held it out, and Ruth read it aloud. Received. Contents noted. Brant. 2 words, but they landed like something solid and permanent, like a post driven into frozen ground. "He'll move fast," Eli said as they walked out. "Brant doesn't sit on federal fraud cases. He can't afford to. His record is the only thing that keeps Cole's kind from testing him directly." He stopped on the boardwalk. His cane was still. "We have the telegraph confirmation, the letter in transit by courier, the secondary registry copies, and Caleb Alderman's tin box." He turned his face toward her. "Cole can challenge any one of those. He can't challenge all 4 simultaneously, not without showing his hand completely." "He's going to try anyway," Ruth said. "Yes." No hesitation. "Which is why we need one more thing before the 14th. She waited. "The original loan documents," Eli said. "The ones the 4 families signed with Cole's bank. The witness signatures. I told you last night, Peebles witnessed 2 of the prior hearings. If his name appears on the original loan documents as well, then we have him tied to the full chain." His jaw tightened. "Those documents are in Cole's bank, in the loan archive. 3rd floor, East Filing Room. Cole built that bank in 1877, and I worked 2 cases in this county in 1878. I know that building." Ruth looked at him. "You want to go into Cole's bank?" "I want to go into Cole's bank," he said, "and look at the files that are technically public record under the Territorial Lending Disclosure Act of 1876, which requires all commercial lenders to make original loan documentation available to named parties upon request." He paused. "Caleb Alderman is a named party on his brother's loan. He has legal standing to request review." "Caleb is in Millbrook." "Caleb is 50 feet away at the grain exchange," Eli said. "And we have about 3 hours before Cole's men are back in this town and watching every door." Caleb Alderman looked at them across his counter with the expression of a man being asked to walk back into the building that had burned his family's house down. His hands were flat on the counter. His jaw was set. He was quiet for a long time. "If I walk into that bank," he said, "every man in this town who works for Cole will know about it before I reach the door." "Yes," Eli said, "they will. And Cole will know we're building a case, a real one. He already suspects it. What he doesn't know is how much we have." Eli leaned on his cane. "Caleb, your brother left this county with 2 horses and a wagon. Francis Cartwright left before the snow with nowhere to go. There are 4 families who lost land they broke their backs to build because one man in a fine coat decided their documents meant whatever he needed them to mean." His voice was steady, unhurried. "You've been keeping that tin box under your counter for 3 years. I'd like to give you a reason to finally put it down." Caleb was quiet for another long moment. Then he untied his apron. The First Territorial Bank of Millbrook occupied a 2-story brick building on the main street, with Cole's name on the sign above the door and the particular hushed solemnity of a place that had been designed to make people feel the weight of money and obligations simultaneously. The teller behind the front counter was a young man who looked at Caleb Alderman with the carefully neutral expression of someone who'd been trained to show nothing but felt something anyway. Caleb set both hands on the counter. "I'm here to review the original loan documentation for the Alderman family account. 1878. His voice came out steady. Ruth counted it as one of the more courageous things she'd seen a man do. "Under the Territorial Disclosure Act, I have legal standing as a named secondary party." The teller looked at him, looked at Ruth, looked at Eli, at the eye patch, at the cane. Something moved in his face that was not quite a decision, but the moment before one. "I'll need to check with the manager," he said. "Of course," Ruth said pleasantly. "We'll wait." The manager was a small man named Hitch, who came down from the second floor with the tight expression of someone who'd been interrupted doing something he considered more important. He looked at Caleb. He looked at the Disclosure Act citation Ruth had written on a piece of paper and set on the counter. He looked at it for a long time. "This is irregular," he said. "The act is not irregular," Ruth said. "It's been territorial law for 7 years. Mr. Cole generally handles these requests personally." "Mr. Cole is in Harlan Creek," Ruth said. "The request is being made now, under the law, by a party with standing." She kept her voice even, the same way she'd kept it even in every room where someone had tried to make the law sound optional. "We'll need the original 1878 loan file for the Alderman account. The complete file, including all witness signatures on all associated documents." Hitch looked at her with the expression of a man who understood he was being outmaneuvered by the law he was supposed to be protected by, and who did not have the authority, in this particular moment, to do anything about it. "Third floor," he said finally. "East room. 15 minutes." They found it in 11. The witness line on the Alderman loan document, dated March 1878, carried 2 signatures. The first was the deceased notary, Stiles. The second was a signature Ruth recognized the moment she saw it, because she'd watched the same hand write its name on a land office receipt 4 days ago. A. Peebles. "Read me the second witness," Eli said. He was standing beside her at the filing table, close enough that she could speak quietly. "Peebles," she said. "Amos Peebles. Same signature as on the county receipt I have in my notebook." Eli's hand found the edge of the table, gripped it once, released. "Check the Prentice file," he said. 1881. She found it. Peebles again, on the original loan document and on the deed modification filing. "Holt Brothers," Eli said. "Peebles. Both documents." "Francis Cartwright." Ruth opened the Cartwright file. Peebles on the loan document and on the deed modification. A second signature she hadn't seen before. Not Stiles. Someone else. "There's a fourth name here," she said, "on the Cartwright modification. Not Peebles, not Stiles." She looked at the signature. R. Crane. She heard Eli's breathing change, just slightly, just enough. "Deputy Crane," she said. "Deputy Crane," he said, very quiet, "who showed up at Agnes's door this morning with a complaint filed by Cole." He was still for a moment. "That's not a cooperative clerk anymore. That's the law enforcement mechanism of Harlan Creek, personally tied to the fraud chain." He turned his face toward her. "Ruth, copy everything, every date, every signature, every reference number, as fast as you can." She copied. Her hand moved quickly across the notebook pages, the same careful precision she'd applied to 7 years of railroad contracts, the same systematic sequencing. Witness names, document dates, reference codes, documented. She was on the third page when she heard the front door of the bank open downstairs. Then voices. One of them she knew. Cole's voice, smooth and unhurried, carried up through the building the way a man's voice carries when he's accustomed to rooms adjusting themselves to accommodate it. She couldn't make out the words. She didn't need to. "He's here," she said. Eli's cane was already in his hand. "Are you done?" "One more file." "How long?" 2 minutes. "You have one." She wrote faster, got what she needed, closed the notebook, pressed it flat against her body under her coat, and followed Eli to the door. They came down the stairs and into the main floor, and Warren Cole was standing at the teller's counter with his coat on and his hat in his hands, and he turned when he heard them on the stairs with the patient, unhurried expression of a man who'd been told they were here and had come to look at them in person. The room had 4 people in it: the teller, Hitch, Cole, and one other man behind Cole, who stood near the door with no particular expression and both hands visible, which was somehow worse than if he'd been reaching for something. "Mr. Hargrove," Cole said. He didn't say Ruth's name. He looked at her the way you look at weather, not at a person, at a condition. "I heard you were in town." "Word travels," Eli said. "It does." Cole set his hat on the counter, unhurried. Everything always unhurried. "I also heard you've been reviewing some of our loan archive files, under the Disclosure Act." A pause. "A creative interpretation of that statute." "A correct one," Eli said. "Caleb Alderman has standing. The files are public record." "Of course," Cole nodded. "I have no objection to transparency." He said the word the way you say a word when you mean its opposite and want the other person to know you know they know it. "I'm curious, though. What exactly is it you're hoping to find?" "We found what we were looking for," Ruth said. Cole looked at her directly for the first time. The recalibration behind his eyes was faster this time, tighter. "Mrs. Calloway." His voice held the specific warmth of a man deploying warmth as a tool. "I want to be straightforward with you. You're new to this county. You don't know the history here, the relationships, the way things work. I don't hold that against you." He picked up his hat. "But you've been given a certain picture of events by people who have their own interests in how those events are characterized. Eli Hargrove is a man I have a great deal of respect for. A great deal." He glanced at Eli. "But he's had a hard few years. Hard years do things to a person's perspective, make threats seem larger than they are." Ruth looked at him. "The seal on the Hargrove deed modification document belongs to Horace Dunbar, who retired 16 months before that document was filed." She kept her voice level and her hands still. "That's not a matter of perspective. That's a matter of dates." Cole was quiet for a moment. "Clerical errors happen," he said. 4 times, Ruth said, with the same dead clerk seal, across 4 separate families, all on the Eastern Ridge, all in the path of the Northern Pacific surveying route. The room went very still. It was the first time she'd said the railroad out loud in Cole's presence. She watched it land, watched the smooth surface of his expression do something it didn't usually do, hold for a half-second too long before resetting, like a mechanism that had encountered unexpected resistance. "I don't know what you think you know about—" "I think I know," Ruth said, "what 7 years of reading railroad contracts taught me to recognize. And I think the federal land officer in Helena, who received our documentation this morning, will find it as recognizable as I do." Cole stood very still. His hat was in his hands. His knuckles, Ruth noticed, had gone white against the brim. The man near the door hadn't moved. Caleb Alderman stood slightly behind Ruth and slightly to her left, and had not said a word since they'd come downstairs. But she was aware of him, the way you're aware of something solid and immovable when the ground around it is uncertain. "Eli," Cole said. His voice had changed. The smoothness was still there, but it was thinner now, stretched over something harder. "This doesn't have to go the way she's pushing it. Whatever she's told you, whatever case she thinks she's building, this ends with you losing the ranch and her going back to wherever she came from. Because that's how it ends when a man without resources fights a man with them. I've seen it. You've seen it." He paused. "Sell me the parcel. Fair price. You keep enough to start clean somewhere a man in your condition can live decently. No hearing, no federal case. No more of this." The silence afterward was the kind that comes after someone has said the thing they've been working up to saying, and the room is waiting to see what the saying of it costs them. Eli was very still. His cane was in his right hand, and his left hand was at his side, relaxed. His one eye was fixed on the space near Cole's voice, with a particular quality of attention Ruth had learned to recognize as the opposite of blindness. The total, calibrated awareness of a man whose remaining senses had been sharpened by 2 years of necessity into something more precise than most people's sight. "My father broke that land by hand," Eli said. "He filed that grant in 1871, and he paid the territorial fee, and he spent 20 years building something that was his, and then mine." His voice was completely level. "And you walked into my house when I couldn't read the paperwork anymore, and you put a dead man's stamp on a document, and you called it a transaction." He took one step forward, just one. "I am not selling you my father's land, Warren. Not for any price. Not under any version of this conversation." Cole looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Ruth. The warmth was completely gone now. What was underneath it was not angry. Anger would have been easier. What was underneath it was the cold, patient calculation of a man resetting a plan. "You have 9 days," he said. "The hearing is on the 14th. Whatever you think you've sent to Helena, a federal officer doesn't move in 9 days on a document he received this morning." He picked up his hat, put it on. 9 days is a long time for things to change. He walked toward the door. The man near the door opened it, and they went out, and the door closed behind them, and the room breathed again. Hitch was staring at his desk. The teller was looking at the wall. Caleb Alderman let out a breath that sounded like it had been held for considerably longer than the conversation. Ruth opened her notebook, wrote down the time, the location, and a verbatim record of Cole's final statement. 9 days is a long time for things to change. She dated it, signed it, handed it to Eli. "Read it to me," he said. She did. "Sign and date your own copy," he said. "Caleb, will you witness?" Caleb took the pen she offered and signed his name at the bottom without hesitation. "That's a threat on the record," Eli said, "in front of 3 witnesses, in his own bank." He took the paper back and folded it inside his coat. Cole is used to operating in rooms where no one writes things down. They rode back to Harlan Creek in the early afternoon, and the gray sky had lowered itself toward the hills, and the air carried the metallic cold that Eli had told her meant real weather coming. She rode close enough that she could hear him easily over the wind. "He's going to move against the ranch," she said. "Not legally, not through the hearing. Something else." "Yes," Eli said. "He threatened the hearing because that's what he wants us to watch. What he'll actually do will come from another direction." He rode in silence for a moment. "I need to be at the ranch tonight. I need to be there and paying attention." "Then we both go," Ruth said. He didn't argue. She hadn't expected him to. They reached Harlan Creek as the first hard gusts came down off the northern ridge, bending the dry grass flat and pushing the cold ahead of something larger behind it. Agnes met them at her door with her coat already on and her expression carrying news.
"There was a man at Mrs. Finn's this afternoon," she said. "Asked for your room, Ruth. Said he was a traveling salesman needing the vacancy." She paused. "Mrs. Finn told him the room was taken. He stood on the street outside for 20 minutes before he left."
Ruth looked at Eli. "We go to the ranch now," he said, "before dark." Agnes handed Ruth a saddlebag she'd already packed. Inside, the tin lamp, matches, 2 days of food, and at the bottom, wrapped in cloth, the original letter with all the documentation they'd compiled over 4 days. Every piece of evidence, sequenced and annotated in Ruth's careful hand.
"I've been making copies," Agnes said by way of explanation. "One set goes to the Post tonight, addressed to the Territorial Commissioner's office, separate from the federal case. Second track." She looked at Ruth. "In case something happens to the first." Ruth looked at this woman who ran a dry goods store in a small Montana town and had been quietly building contingency plans while everyone underestimated her. "Agnes," she said. "Go," Agnes said. "Both of you. Go now." They went. The ranch was cold and dark when they arrived, but undisturbed. Every object in its place. The cattle in the near pasture accounted for. The barn door on its hinges, the latch seated properly. Ruth built the fire, while Eli moved through the cabin by memory and feel, checking each room, each window, each door. When he came back to the main room, the fire was going and the lamp was lit, and she was sitting at the table with a notebook open to a fresh page. 9 days, she said.
9 days, he said. He sat down across from her. His hands found the table edge. Brant will have the full documentation by courier in 4 days. He's thorough, and he's fast, and he hates Cole's kind of fraud because it's the kind that hides behind paperwork and courtesy and the willingness of small men to look the other way. He looked toward her. But 9 days is 9 days. Cole knows we sent the telegraph. He'll be working every contact he has in Helena to slow Brant down.
Can he do that?
He can try. A pause. He has county contacts. He may have 1 or 2 territorial ones. But Brant operates at the federal level, and Cole's network is thickest at the county. There's a gap. His jaw set. We need to widen it.
How?
The Pryor families, Eli said. The Aldermans, the Prentice family, the Holts. If they file supporting complaints with a federal office, independent, corroborating, Cole can't suppress all of them simultaneously. Each complaint is another track, another document, another authority he'd have to compromise separately. He leaned forward. Caleb can reach his brother in Nebraska. Do you have contacts who can find the Prentice family? Agnes will know, Ruth said. She was already writing. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind had picked up into something continuous and heavy. The cabin held against it. Ruth? She looked up from the notebook. Eli was looking at her, facing her, his one eye aimed at the sound of her breathing, at the place in the air where she was. You wrote a letter once before, he said, that you believed in, that you documented carefully, and it wasn't enough. I know, she said. This is different. We have more. We have better. We have tracks Cole doesn't know about and a federal officer with standing and a prior pattern across 5 cases. He paused. But I want you to know that I know what it cost you. To do this again, to trust that this time the right people will act on it. Ruth set down her pen. She looked at the man across the table from her, this careful, precise, stubborn man who'd been sitting alone in this cabin for 2 years, knowing exactly what had been taken from him, and rebuilding around the shape of it, piece by piece, one axe stroke at a time, asking nobody for anything. "I stopped trusting the right people," she said. "That's not what I'm doing this time." She picked up the pen. "This time, I'm trusting the documentation, the law, the evidence." She looked at him steadily. "And you." The fire shifted in the stove. The wind pressed against the walls with steady, cold patience. Eli Hargrove sat with both hands flat on the table in the lamplight and said nothing for a long moment. And Ruth Calloway wrote in her notebook and didn't need him to. They had 9 days. They had 4 tracks of evidence. They had a federal officer with a telegraph confirmation and a courier on the road. And somewhere in Harlan Creek, Warren Cole was making a plan. So were they. The first thing that went wrong happened on the 6th day. Ruth was at the table in Eli's cabin, working through the sequencing of the Prentice family documents. Caleb had reached his brother Joseph in Nebraska by telegraph, and Joseph had confirmed he'd kept copies of the original loan papers, which were on their way by courier, when she heard hooves on the frozen road outside. Fast hooves. More than one horse. Eli heard them before she did. He was on his feet and at the window before she'd looked up from the notebook, his hand flat against the wall beside the glass, reading the sound of the approach the way he read everything. Through the quality of it, the weight, the pace. 3 horses, he said. One rider is heavier than the other 2, and they're not slowing down. They didn't slow down. They stopped hard at the fence line, and Ruth was already at the door when the knock came. Not the patient heavy knock of Deputy Crane. Something faster, more urgent. She opened it. The man on the porch was perhaps 35, trail dusty, wearing a coat with a Federal Land Office insignia on the breast pocket that Ruth recognized from the letterhead she'd been writing to for 6 days. Behind him, 2 other riders stayed on their horses. "Mrs. Calloway?" he said. "Yes?" "I'm Deputy Commissioner Harris, Federal Land Office, Helena. Thomas Brandt sent me." He reached into his coat and produced a folded document. "We have a problem." He came inside. Eli stood by the stove, and Ruth sat across from Harris at the table. And Harris laid out what had happened in the careful, factual way of a man delivering news he knew would land hard. Brandt had received the telegraph, had begun the review process immediately, had pulled the federal cross-reference files on the Hargrove parcel, and found the secondary documentation Ruth and Eli had described, confirmed the seal discrepancy, confirmed the registry mismatch, begun drafting the intervention order for the 14th. Then, 2 days ago, a counterfiling had arrived at the Helena office. Cole's lawyers, not local lawyers, Ruth noted, lawyers from Billings, which meant Cole had been preparing this contingency before Ruth had ever walked into the Harlan Creek Land Office. The counterfiling claimed that the Hargrove parcel had been the subject of a voluntary deed modification signed by Eli Hargrove himself in 1880, predating the forged transfer entirely, and that this modification, signed, witnessed, notarized, superseded any claim against the 1882 transfer. "A second document," Ruth said. "A second forgery," Eli said from the stove. His voice was flat, exact. Harris looked at him. "That's what we believe, yes, but the document is sophisticated. Different seal, a current notary seal, valid credentials, no retirement date issue. The signature purports to be yours, Mr. Hargrove." He paused. "From a period when you could still see." The silence in the cabin had a particular quality. "He's been holding it," Eli said. "He had it prepared months ago, and he held it back, waiting to see how far we got before deploying it." He turned away from the window. "He let us build the case against the 1882 transfer, let us find the registry, let us send the documentation to Helena, Because he knew he had this ready. He wanted to see what we had before he played it. Why? Ruth said. Because if he plays it too early, we find it too early, and we have time to counter it. If he plays it after we've committed our full case to Helena, he thinks we're too far in to adjust. His jaw was set hard. He thinks we've spent everything. Have we? Harris asked. Ruth looked at the notebook on the table.
At 9 days of documentation, 12 pages of notes, 4 parallel tracks of evidence. She thought about what she knew, not what she hoped, not what she felt, what she actually knew from 7 years of reading documents that other people had signed without reading. The 1880 modification, she said. What date specifically? Harris checked his papers. August 14th, 1880. And the notary seal? Harold Pierce, Harlan Creek. Harris paused. Currently practicing. Who is Harold Pierce? Ruth asked Eli. Old man, 70s. He's been the town notary since before I was born. Eli's voice was careful. He's not Cole's man. He's never been Cole's man. Then Cole used his seal without his knowledge, Ruth said. Or Cole forged his credentials. She opened her notebook. Either way, Harold Pierce is still alive, still in this town. And either he notarized that document in August 1880, or he didn't. She looked up at Harris. If Pierce says he never saw that document, the forgery argument is complete. And if he can identify the seal as not matching his current instrument, notary seals change, Harris said carefully. He may have had a different instrument in 1880. He may have, Ruth said, or he may remember exactly what he did and didn't notarize in 1880. Because men who've been doing precise legal work for 50 years tend to keep records. She stood. I need to talk to Harold Pierce today. Right now, before Cole gets to him first. Harris was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at Eli. You understand that if the 1880 document holds up at the federal level, the intervention order won't issue in time for the 14th. I understand, Eli said. And if the intervention order doesn't issue, I understand what happens if it doesn't issue, Eli said. Not sharp, just final. Give us until tonight. Harold Pierce lived in a house on the east side of Harlan Creek that smelled of pipe tobacco and old paper, and the specific orderliness of a man who'd organized everything around him to compensate for what age was doing to everything else. He was 73, small, precise in his movements, with the slightly magnified eyes of someone who'd spent decades reading small print through thick lenses. He opened the door when Ruth knocked, and looked at her, and then at Eli behind her, and something moved in his face that was not surprise, but the recognition of something he'd been half expecting. Eli Hargrove, he said. Mr. Pierce, Eli said. May we come in? They sat in Pierce's front room, and Ruth showed him the description of the document Harris had given her. The date, the purported signature, the notary credentials attributed to him. She watched Pierce's face as she read. He was quiet for a long moment after she finished. August 14th, 1880, he said. Yes, sir. Pierce stood. He moved to a cabinet against the far wall with the careful, deliberate steps of a man who knew where he was going and didn't need to hurry to get there. He opened the bottom drawer, produced a flat ledger book, dark green, worn at the corners. I have kept a notary record since 1851, he said. He carried it back to his chair and opened it across his knees. His fingers moved through the pages with practiced efficiency. Every document I have ever notarized is in this book. Date, parties, description, my instrument number for that period. He found the page, ran his finger down the column for August 1880. August 14th, 1880. He looked up. I notarized 2 documents that day. A bill of sale for Thomas Greer's wagon and team, and the water rights agreement between the Miller brothers. He closed the ledger.
I did not notarize any deed modification involving Eli Hargrove or Warren Cole or any parcel on the Eastern Creek Ridge. Not on August 14th. Not in August 1880.
Not at any time.
Ruth wrote it down. Every word. The ledger reference, the page number, the dates of the actual documents. "Mr. Pierce," she said, "would you be willing to make a sworn statement to that effect for the Federal Land Office?" Pierce looked at her, then at Eli. "I've been watching what Cole has done in this county for 6 years," he said. "I've been watching it, and I've been too old and too small and too alone to do anything about it." His voice was steady. "Yes, I'll make the statement. I'll make it today, in front of your federal officer, and I'll bring this ledger, and I'll swear on it." Ruth looked at Eli. He was looking at the space near Pierce's voice, with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Not relief exactly. Something that sat deeper than relief. Something that had been compressed for a long time, and was very carefully, very slowly, releasing. "Thank you," he said. His voice was rough at the edges. "Don't thank me," Pierce said. "Just make sure it counts." Harris took Pierce's sworn statement that afternoon at Agnes Pike's kitchen table, with Agnes as witness and Caleb Alderman, who had ridden in from Millbrook that morning with the Prentice family courier documents, as second witness. Pierce read from his ledger in the same quiet, precise voice he'd used in his front room, and Harris wrote it down verbatim and had Pierce sign each page. And when it was done, Harris sat back in his chair and looked at the documentation spread across Agnes's table. The secondary registry copies, the seal analysis, the witness signature chain across all 5 prior cases, the sworn statement from Harold Pierce, and was quiet for a moment. "It's enough," he said. "It was enough before this. This removes the last viable challenge." He began gathering the papers into sequence. "I'll telegraph Brant tonight from Millbrook. The intervention order will be in place before the 14th. The hearing will be stayed pending federal review, which, given the criminal elements of this case, the forgery, the conspiracy, the obstruction, will be a federal proceeding, not a county one." He looked at Eli. "Coles County judge has no jurisdiction over a federal fraud case." The room was quiet. Agnes set her hands flat on the table, said nothing. Her expression was the expression of a woman who'd been waiting 6 years for this specific sentence. Caleb Alderman looked at his hands. Ruth looked at the notebook in front of her. 12 days of work, 43 pages of notes. A chain of evidence that started with a dead clerk's seal and ended here, in this kitchen, with a federal officer saying the words she'd come to this county hoping to hear. She thought about Daniel, about the bridge, about the letter she'd written at 3 a.m. that had been right and had not been enough. This time it was enough. She closed the notebook. The 14th arrived with a particular quality of a day that knows it matters. Cold, clear, the sky an uncompromising blue above the white peaks. The kind of Montana morning that made no concessions and offered no comfort, but was entirely, absolutely honest about what it was. The county land hearing was scheduled for 10. At 9:15, Harris's intervention order arrived at the county judge's office by federal courier, and the judge, who had been having dinner at Warren Cole's house every second Friday for 11 years, read it twice and called his clerk and told him to notify all parties that the hearing was stayed indefinitely, pending federal review. Ruth was at Eli's kitchen table when Agnes's boy came riding out with the news. She read the note, set it down, picked up her coffee cup, set it down again without drinking. Eli was at the stove. He'd heard the horse. He'd heard the boy's voice in the yard. He stood with his back to her and his hands on the stove rail and waited. "It stayed," Ruth said. "The hearing.
Federal intervention order was served this morning. He didn't move for a moment. Then he turned. His face was composed the way it always was. The same careful control that had become as familiar to her as the sound of his cane on the floorboards. But something had shifted underneath it. Something that had been braced against a weight for a very long time, and had just found the weight was gone. "Cole?" he said. "Harris said the federal fraud investigation will move forward. The forgery, the conspiracy, the 5 prior cases." Ruth looked at her notebook. "Peebles has already engaged a lawyer. Crane resigned from the sheriff's office this morning. Agnes's boy said the whole town knows before noon." "Cole himself?" "Harris said a federal warrant is likely within the month. The railroad connection makes it a larger case than just county fraud. When you're sitting on land you acquired through forgery in the path of a federal infrastructure project, the jurisdictions compound." She paused. "He's not going anywhere. His assets in this county are frozen, pending review." Eli was quiet for a long moment. "My father's grant," he said. "The 1871 filing." "Confirmed, on record, untouched." Ruth looked at him. "The ranch is yours. It was always yours. The paperwork just says it clearly now." He leaned back against the stove. He was looking toward the window, toward the pale winter light coming through the glass, toward whatever shapes and shadows his remaining sight could still register. His hands were relaxed at his sides. His cane was hooked on the chair behind him. Ruth sat at his table in the cabin he'd built his life inside of. The cabin where every object was in its exact place, and the coffee cups went 2 inches from the edge, and the matches were always on the shelf above the basin. And she looked at the man her husband's death, and a railroad termination, and a narrow room at Mrs. Finn's had brought her to. And she thought about what Agnes had said that first morning. He's been waiting for someone who knows what to do with what he finds. She picked up her pen, looked at the clean page in the notebook. "There are still things to document," she said. "Harris will need the full evidentiary sequence formatted for the federal proceeding. The prior family cases, Prentice and Holt, haven't been formally incorporated yet. And the railroad connection needs a separate track, separate documentation, because that's a different statute." She wrote the heading on the fresh page. "It'll take another 2 weeks at least." Eli pushed off from the stove. He crossed the room and pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, his hands finding the table edge with the automatic precision she'd stopped noticing because it had become simply the way he moved through the world. 2 weeks, he said, at least. "And after that?" Ruth kept her eyes on the notebook. "After that, the federal case runs on its own. Harris has what he needs. Brandt has what he needs." She paused. "I'd be done." The cabin was quiet. The fire in the stove made its small, steady sounds. Outside, the wind moved through the dry winter grass with a sound like something being said too quietly to hear. "Where would you go?" Eli asked. Ruth looked at the page, at the heading she'd just written, at the 43 pages of notes behind it that represented 12 days of being useful in a way she hadn't been allowed to be useful for 3 years. "I don't know," she said. "I came here because I had nowhere else to go. I stayed because there was work that needed doing." She set the pen down. "That's the honest answer." "It's a good answer," Eli said. "It's the kind of answer that's true." She looked at him. "I've been thinking," he said, "about the ranch, about what it needs." His voice was careful, deliberate, the same voice he used when he was building towards something precise. "It needs hands. It needs someone who can read the documents when documents need reading. The federal case will produce paperwork for years, filings, responses, the railroad negotiation when that comes. Because the railroad will come. And when they come for this land, I want someone sitting across from their lawyers
who knows exactly what every word of their offer means. He paused. I can run this ranch. I've always been able to run it. But I need eyes I can trust. Ruth was quiet. I'm not asking you to stay out of need, Eli said. His voice had changed, still controlled, but the thing underneath the control was visible now in a way it hadn't been before. The way the mountains showed their shape most clearly in the spare, honest light of winter. I know what it sounds like when a man asks a woman to stay because he needs her. That's not what I'm asking. He found her coffee cup on the table by feel and moved it 2 inches to the right, back to the exact spot it had been before she'd moved it without thinking. I'm asking because this morning I stood in this cabin and heard the weight come off of something I've been carrying for 2 years. And the first thing I thought was that I wanted to tell you. He paused. Not Agnes, not Harris. You. Ruth looked at the coffee cup in its exact right place. She thought about the boarding house room in Kansas City, the termination notice under the door, the train west with one case and a notebook, and the flat, scoured feeling of a person who has lost enough that they've stopped flinching at the prospect of losing more. She thought about a land office counter and a dead clerk's seal and a document that had been wrong from the first line and had been sitting in a public file waiting for someone to look at it closely enough to say so. She thought about what it had felt like to say so, to have it matter, to build something airtight and true from the evidence up and hand it to the authority withstanding, and have the authority act on it. She thought about the bridge, about Daniel, about the letter that hadn't been enough. This had been enough. She picked up the pen. The railroad negotiation, she said. When they come, and they will come, because Harris told me the route is confirmed, it's just a matter of when. You need someone who has read Northern Pacific contracts, who knows their standard acquisition language, and where they hide the provisions that reduce the compensation. She looked at him steadily. I have read 47 Northern Pacific acquisition contracts. I know every provision they use, and I know every counter-argument that holds. She paused. When they come for this land, they will not get it for survey value. They will pay what it's worth. Every acre of creek access, every foot of ridge elevation, every head of cattle displaced. She set the pen to the page. I'll make sure of it. Something crossed Eli Hargrove's face. It was not complicated. It was not heavily qualified, or carefully controlled, or braced against anything. It was simply the expression of a man who had been in the dark for a long time and had just heard a sound he recognized. Not rescue, not relief. Something quieter and more permanent than both. The sound of not being alone. Then stay, he said. Ruth wrote the heading on the fresh page. I already am, she said. Outside, the November sky held its cold, clear blue above the white peaks, and the winter grass moved in long, slow waves across the eastern ridge, and the cattle stood quiet in the near pasture, and the smoke rose straight from the cabin chimney into the still air. And on the land that James Coltrane Hargrove had filed for in April of 1871, and that his son had held through blindness and fraud and 2 years of fighting in the dark, the work continued. Because the work always continued. And now there were 2 people to do it. And the paperwork, for the first time, said exactly what was true.